Then she heard it. Breathing. It was not her own. It came from above. Her torch tilted upward slowly, her hand trembling, and then she saw them. Eyes. Dozens of faintly glowing eyes peering down at her from the cracks in the ceiling board. Adana's legs nearly gave way. She staggered back, her breath caught in her throat. The eyes blinked, one after the other, and the sound of low whispers filled the room. It was not one voice. It was many. Some were high-pitched, some deep, some broken, but all carried pain. "Stay, stay, stay," they murmured, their voices blending together. Adana shook her head violently, her tears spilling. "No, no, please." One of the boards cracked slightly. A thin, bony hand slipped out, its nails long and black. It scraped the wall as it reached down for her. Adana screamed and jumped back, her torch falling from her hand. The beam rolled across the floor, casting wild shadows. Shapes began to crawl out. They were not fully human. Their bodies were thin like sticks, their skin stretched tight, their mouths hanging open as though every breath hurt. Some looked like children, some like grown men and women, all clinging to the walls and ceiling like lizards. One of them whispered, "Food," another hissed. "Hungry?" Adana pressed against the wardrobe, her hands trembling, her heart banging like a drum. The creatures dropped lower, their long fingers scratching the air, their glowing eyes fixed on her. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like stone. Then a voice came from the door. Calm, cold. "I told you not to touch this door." Adana spun around. Madam stood at the entrance. Her face was calm, her wrapper glittering faintly in the torchlight, but her eyes burned with fury. Dara stood beside her. Her phone raised as if she was recording everything. Adana's voice broke. What are they?" Madam stepped inside slowly, her eyes never leaving Adana. "They are my treasures," she said softly. "Each one is a blessing. Each one gave me wealth and respect. People think I pray harder than others. But no, it is them. They keep me powerful." Adana shook her head, tears spilling. "No, they are people. They are human beings." Madam's lips curved into a smile, cold and sharp. They were people, not anymore. The creatures hissed louder, their whispers rising like wind. Some stretched their arms toward Adana, their fingers almost touching her skin. Adana cried out, falling to her knees. "Please, I didn't mean—" "Silence!" Madam snapped, and the creatures froze instantly, bowing their heads as if chained to her command. She bent closer, her eyes burning into Adana's. "Now you know my secret, and you know what happens to anyone who knows too much." Her words were soft, but they cut deeper than a knife. Madam lifted her hand slightly, and the creatures stirred again, their bodies crawling closer to Adana, their whispers growing louder. Adana screamed, covering her face. But then a small voice rang out from the corner of the room. "Stop!" Adana lowered her hands quickly. The little girl stood there, her face pale, her bracelet glowing faintly in the weak light. Her eyes were full of fear, but her voice carried strength. "She's mine," the girl said. "You cannot take her." The creatures froze, their glowing eyes turning toward the girl. Madam's smile faltered. Her face twisted with anger. "Go back inside," she hissed. The girl shook her head, her tears shining. "No, she promised me. She belongs to me." Adana's heart pounded harder. "What? I never—" The girl's voice broke, but stayed strong. "You did. You promised not to leave me. If you break it now, I will be gone forever." Madam's scream filled the room, her voice sharp and furious. "She belongs to me!" The creatures hissed louder, their whispers clashing together. The walls trembled, the bulb flickered, and the ceiling groaned as if it was about to fall. The room shook with chaos. Voices rising, eyes burning, fingers reaching. Madam turned to Adana, her face twisted with rage. "Choose," she shouted. "Will you belong to me or to her?" The creatures covered the walls and ceiling, their glowing eyes fixed on Adana. They whispered together, their voices rising and falling like a song without tune. The word they repeated again and again made her body shake. "Choose, choose, choose." Adana fell to her knees, tears running down her face. Her hands trembled so much she could barely hold the little girl's arm. Madam stood in the middle of the room, her wrapper shining faintly in the weak bulb light, her eyes filled with fire. She raised her hand and spoke in a calm voice that cut through the whispers. "Choose me, Adana, and you will live. You will never know hunger again. You will wear fine clothes and sit at my table as family. But if you choose her," she pointed at the girl, "you will join these creatures. You will crawl the walls beside them." The creatures hissed and reached out with long, bony fingers, their nails scratching the walls. The girl stepped closer to Adana, her thin body trembling but her eyes strong. She raised her wrist, showing the blue beads of her bracelet. "Don't forget, Chiamaka. You promised me. You swore you would not leave me behind." Adana shook her head quickly, her tears falling. "I don't remember promising you anything," she cried. The girl's voice broke with pain. "That day in the market, when I disappeared, you prayed to God with all your heart. You said, 'If you bring her back to me, I will never leave her.' I heard it, Adana. I was already trapped here, but I heard your words." Adana gasped, the memory rushing back. She remembered standing in the market, holding her mother's wrapper, crying as people searched for Ifunanya. She had made that desperate prayer. She had forgotten, but the girl had not. Madam laughed, a sharp, cruel laugh. "So this is it? A prayer whispered in fear? You think that can stand against me?" She lifted her hand again, and the creatures stirred, crawling lower, their glowing eyes flashing brighter. "Choose me now, girl, or suffer forever." The girl held Adana's hand tighter. "If you don't choose me, I will vanish forever, and then you will be alone." The whispers filled the air, louder now, shaking the walls. "Choose, choose, choose." Adana bent forward, her face in her hands. She thought of her mother in the village, sick and waiting. She thought of her hunger, her shame, her pain in this house. To choose Madam was to live, but it would mean burying her soul. To choose the girl was to face death, but it meant keeping her promise. She raised her head slowly, her lips trembling, her eyes full of tears. "I choose." She turned to Madam first, her voice breaking but firm. "You have money, you have power, you have everything, but you have no soul. I will never belong to you." Madam's smile dropped at once, her face twisting with rage. "Fool!" she shouted, her voice shaking the whole room. Adana turned to the girl, holding her small hand tightly. "Ifunia, I choose you. I will not leave you again." The creatures screamed all at once, their whispers turning into sharp cries that made the bulb above swing. They banged against the walls and ceiling, their thin bodies twisting in pain. The bracelet on the girl's wrist began to glow. The blue light spread slowly at first, then poured across the room like water. Wherever the light touched, the creatures shrieked, their bodies shrinking, their shadows burning away. Madam screamed too, her voice sharp and broken. "No, they are mine! They belong to me!" She rushed forward to grab the bracelet, but the light hit her chest and threw her against the wall. She slid down, her wrapper torn, her face twisted with fury. The girl's voice rose above the noise. "You cannot keep us. Promises made in love cannot be broken." The light grew brighter, burning away the darkness. One by one, the creatures melted into dust, their voices fading into silence. The bulb flickered once and steadied, filling the room with a calm glow. Adana held the girl close, her chest rising and falling in relief. For the first time, the room was quiet. She turned to the girl, hoping her eyes. "Ifunanya, are you free now?" The girl shook her head slowly, her tears shining in the light. "Not yet. This house still holds me." Adana's heart sank. "What do you mean?" The girl pointed toward the door with a trembling hand. "Until Madam is gone, I cannot leave." Adana turned her head sharply and froze. Madam was standing again, but she did not look the same. Her skin had cracked in places, black lines spreading across her face like roots. Her eyes had turned dark, empty holes, and when she opened her mouth, her teeth were long and sharp. Her voice was no longer smooth. It was heavy, broken, and filled with hate. "If I cannot keep them, then I will keep you." She lunged forward, her arms stretched wide, her face twisted like a beast. Adana screamed and pulled the girl close as the red room shook once more. Madam's face was no longer her own. The smooth powder had peeled, the rich woman's glow gone, and what stood before Adana was a monster wearing a wrapper. Her eyes were hollow, black holes that sucked the light, and her teeth stretched long and sharp like a beast. She lunged, but the bracelet's glow forced her back. She hissed, covering her face for a moment, then straightened slowly. Her chest rose and fell, and her voice came out rough and angry. "You think you can stand against me? Do you even know what this room is? Do you know who I am?" Adana held the girl tighter, her own voice shaking. "You are evil. That is what you are." Madam laughed, the sound deep and broken, echoing off the walls. "Evil? No, I am wise. I am brave. I took what others fear to touch, and that is why I stand while others beg in dust." She spread her arms wide, the red walls pulsing faintly behind her, as if the room itself breathed with her word. You want to know the truth? Then listen. I was not always rich. I was like you, Adana barefoot in the village, mocked by those who had more. I came to Lagos with nothing. People spat on me in the market. Men laughed at me. Women closed their doors to me. I sold fabric, but no one bought. My child cried at night, and my husband cursed me. Her face twisted as the memory dragged across her tongue. Then, one night, when I had nothing left, an old woman came to me at the market. Her back was bent, her voice was soft, but her eyes were not human. She said, "Do you want wealth that never ends? Do you want to be greater than all those who mock you? Then build me a room in your house. Paint the door red and feed me souls." Adana gasped, her stomach turning. "God forbid!" But Madam's voice only grew stronger. I laughed at her at first, but she gave me this. She lifted her hand, and for a moment, a faint black key mark glowed on her palm before fading again. She told me, "Bring one soul, just one, and you will see." Her eyes burned as she leaned closer, her monstrous face almost touching Adana's. That night, I lured a girl from the street. She was hungry. I promised her food and warmth. I brought her here. I locked the red door. By morning, my shop was full of customers. My drawers overflowed with money. I became Madam Bisi, and I never stopped. The girl in Adana's arms whimpered, but Madam's words rolled on like thunder. Every few months, I brought another, a maid, a beggar child, a woman desperate for work. They vanished, but they never left. Their shadows stayed here. Their whispers became my strength. And with every soul, my riches grew. People respect me. Pastors bow before me. But they don't know it is this room that feeds me. She turned sharply toward the walls. The creatures stirred, their faint outlines moving again as her anger rose. "These are my treasures. Do you see them? They are my soldiers, my power, my crown. They are mine." The girl's bracelet glowed brighter, and Madam's scream cracked the air. She slammed her hand against the red wall, and the paint rippled like water. "This is the covenant," she shouted. "This door is the altar. As long as I live, they cannot leave. As long as this door stands, they are mine." Adana shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "You are a murderer. You destroyed children. You destroyed lives." Madam laughed again, bitter and broken. "Murderer? No. I am the one who dared. Others prayed for change. I paid the price. That is the difference between me and you." The room groaned, the bulb above flickering violently, dust falling like rain. The girl pressed her face against Adana's chest, whispering through her tears. "She cannot hold us forever. Her power is cracking. The promise you made is stronger than her bargain." Madam's eyes blazed, and she screamed, "Then let us see which is stronger, love or hunger." She raised both arms high, and the red door shook, its wood groaning, the paint dripping like fresh blood. The creatures on the wall stirred, their whispers rising again, louder, faster. Some began to drop, crawling toward Adana on thin arms and legs, their glowing eyes burning with hunger. Adana pulled the girl tighter, her voice breaking. "God, help us!" The bracelet shone like fire, casting blue light that pushed the creatures back for a moment. But Madam pressed her hand harder against the wall, and the red paint bubbled like boiling oil. "I will not lose," she screamed. "This room belongs to me!" The ceiling cracked with a thunderous sound. Pieces of wood fell, the whole house shaking as if it might collapse. The creatures screamed, the girl cried out, and Adana clung to her with all her strength. Madam's monstrous face stretched into a grin, her black eyes burning. "You will both die here with them, and your souls will keep me young forever." She rushed forward with all her strength, her claws reaching for Adana's throat, and then the door itself banged shut behind her with a force that shook the floor. The door slammed, and Madam staggered, as if the house itself had struck her. Dust rained down, the bulb swung wildly, and the creatures hissed, their glowing eyes restless. Adana clutched the girl tight, her body trembling, but in her chest, her mother's words rose like a steady drum. "When fear is loud, hold the light and hold the truth." She had no time to pray, no time to think, so she held the bracelet instead. The cowrie shell warmed in her palm, glowing faintly blue. That light felt like truth, and the child's hand in hers felt like the only promise she could not break. Madam lifted her face. Her eyes were hollow black holes, her mouth stretched with sharp teeth. "You cannot leave," she said, her voice deep and broken. "You belong to me." The girl pressed the beads against Adana's skin, and the glow spread further. "Don't let go," she whispered. The creatures began to crawl down the walls, their nails scratching, their whispers rising like a storm. Dara stood at the doorway, her face pale, her phone forgotten in her hand. For the first time, she looked like a frightened child, not a spoiled one. "Mummy, please stop," she whispered. Madam snapped her hair toward her daughter, her voice sharp as a whip. "Stay out!" But Dara did not move back. She stepped closer, her eyes wet. "This is wrong!" The room shivered. Even the creatures seemed confused. One of them reached for Adana's hair, but when the bracelet's light touched its fingers, it recoiled with a hiss. The girl squeezed Adana's hand. "Count," she whispered again. Adana's lips trembled, but she obeyed. 1, 2, 3. The girl joined softly. 4, 5, 6. The numbers flowed together like water, and the whispers faltered. Some of the creatures lowered their heads. The simple rhythm broke the chaos. Madam screamed, rushing forward with claws raised, but Adana lifted the bracelet high, and the shell shone brighter. It burned against Madam's palm, striking the black mark on her skin. Madam cried out, stumbling back, her face twisted in pain. The red wall rippled like water. Cracks spread slowly across the paint, and the creatures groaned as if something inside them was loosening. Dara's voice rose, trembling but firm. "She did this! My mother trapped you here!" The house groaned in answer. Dust fell. The bulb flickered violently. From the ceiling came a sharp crack, and small trinkets wrapped in old cloth dropped onto the floor, breaking open to reveal faded names carved in wood. The creatures bowed their heads at the sight. Adana pulled the handle of the red door. At first, it resisted. Then it loosened with a tired sigh. Light from the corridor spilled in. She turned to the girl. "We are leaving." But Madam was not finished. She pushed herself to her knees, her cracked face darker now, her eyes burning with hate. "You think you have won?" she growled. "You broke a door. You did not break the hand that built it." Behind her, a crooked shadow bent across the wall, and a dry voice slid into the room, calm but sharp. A room can always be rebuilt. The creatures shrank back. The bulb dimmed to a dull glow. Adana's stomach dropped. This was not Madam's voice. This was something older. The shadow on the wall bent low, crooked and thin, and the voice that came with it was dry like leaves burning in harmattan. A room can always be rebuilt. Madam froze. For the first time, fear passed across her cracked face. "No, not now," she whispered. From the corner, the old woman stepped into the weak bulb light. Her back was hunched, her eyes pale but sharp, her wrapper faded with age. Yet her presence filled the red room more than Madam's rage ever had. "You were bold, Bisi," the old woman said softly. "But boldness does not cancel debt. You fed me well, but now your hand shakes." Madam staggered forward, claws raised. "I gave you souls. I kept the covenant. Don't take this from me." The old woman's lips curled in a thin smile. "And still, your greed was not enough. Look at you now, losing to a child's promise." Adana held the girl tightly, the bracelet glowing in her palm. Dara stood close, her face pale, but her eyes firm. "What do you want?" Adana whispered. The old woman turned to her, and her gaze felt heavier than Madam's claws. "I want balance. A room cannot be opened without a price. One must stay behind to seal it. That is the law." Adana's stomach twisted. "No, no, we are leaving together." The girl clung to her tighter. "She's lying. Don't listen." But Madam's laughter cracked through the tension. "Do you hear, Chiamaka? If you want her free, you must take her place. That is how the door stays alive. That is how the covenant feeds." Adana shook her head violently, tears running down her cheeks. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Hold the light, hold the truth." She lifted the bracelet high. "The truth is this," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "You tricked them. You lied. A covenant built on lies cannot stand." The blue light spread wider, flooding the room, pushing against both Madam and the old woman. The creatures groaned, some fading into dust, others pressing their faces to the cracks, as if begging for release. The old woman hissed, lifting her hand, but the bracelet flared, and the cowrie shell burned with a pure glow that swallowed her shadow. She stumbled back, her figure thinning, breaking into smoke. Madam screamed, rushing one last time, but Dara stepped forward, blocking her with trembling hands. "No more, Mummy!" she cried. "I will not obey you again." The words struck harder than the light. Madam staggered, her claws shrinking back into fingers, her body collapsing under the weight of her daughter's truth. She fell to the floor, screaming as the red paint peeled away from the walls and the creatures dissolved into silence. The old woman's shadow vanished with a final hiss. The house grew still. Adana pulled the girl close. Dara clung to her side, and together they stepped into the corridor. The red door slammed shut behind them, its paint now dull and grey. But the air whispered faintly as they walked away. A room can always be rebuilt. The corridor felt strange as they stepped out, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The red door behind them was shut, its colour drained to dull grey, no longer glowing, no longer alive. For the first time since she entered this house, Adana felt the air taste clean. She held the girl's hand tight, her other arm around Dara. The three of them moved slowly down the stairs. Each step groaned, but the sound was ordinary wood this time, not whispers or cries. When they reached the sitting room, the silence pressed around them, heavy but not dangerous. Dara leaned against the wall, her face pale, her eyes wide. "It's over," she whispered, almost as if she could not believe it. Adana looked at her firmly. "It's over because you spoke the truth." Dara swallowed and lowered her head. For once, there was no pride in her face, no sharp command in her voice, just a girl who had carried fear too long. The girl with the bracelet tugged Adana's arm and pointed toward the front door. "Outside?" she said softly. Adana nodded, and they moved together. Her hands shook as she unlocked the gate and stepped into the cool night air. The compound felt wider, the stars above brighter, the world beyond real again. The girl stopped, turned her face to the sky, and closed her eyes. The bracelet on her wrist glowed one last time, brighter than ever. The blue light spilled over her small frame, and for a moment she looked whole, no longer thin and pale, but free. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice light, almost floating. She smiled at Adana with tears in her eyes. "You kept your promise." Before Adana could speak, the light lifted her gently, and in the next breath, she was gone. Not in pain, not in fear, gone like smoke carried by a kind wind. Adana fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She touched the ground where the girl had stood, whispering her name again and again. "Ifunanya, Ifunanya." But this time, her tears were not only sorrow, they were release. Dara knelt beside her, placing a shaky hand on her shoulder. "She is free," she said softly. Adana nodded, wiping her face. She stood slowly, her body weak, but her spirit stronger than it had ever been. Behind them, the house groaned one final time. The walls cracked, the roof trembled, and with a heavy crash, the red room collapsed into dust. The cursed door shattered into splinters that blew away on the night wind. Madam's scream echoed faintly once, then faded forever. Adana watched it fall, her chest rising and falling with relief. She had survived. She had fought, and she had won. Dara turned to her, her eyes wet. "What happens now?" Adana looked at the broken house, then at the road stretching beyond the gate. "Now we start again." But this time, in truth, she reached for Dara's hand, and the girl took it slowly, as if afraid but willing. Side by side, They walked into the street, leaving the cursed house behind. The night air carried only the sound of crickets. No whispers, no laughter, no knocks. For Adana, the victory was not just the survival. It was the promise kept, the truth spoken, and the freedom won. And as she stepped forward into the waiting dawn, she knew one thing with all her heart. The red door was gone, and it would never hold her again. If you watched till the end, thank you for watching. If this story was captivating, do not hesitate to subscribe, like, and comment to get more thrilling stories from us. Once again, this is Story Time by NWA, and we are looking forward to creating more interesting stories with you. Bye for now.